Hi, I'm Joshua Ponsafo of the New African Concept. I believe strongly that you've been blessed so far with the various episodes of the Voice of Reformation. And I'm very much excited to inform you that with the next 3 months ahead, February, March, and then April, there is a special package in the area of apologetics. I know you have several questions on your mind, and so do I. For the month of February, we'll be considering the subject area of the Bible. So questions like, is the Bible truly the Word of God, or it is just a figment of human beings? And that, how did we even arrive at getting our Bible today? Are there various versions of the Bible? And how did we even get that? And are they the same? Are they similar? Or they are different? In the month of March, we'll also be looking at the subject of black skepticism. I believe you've heard and seen that there is a new wave that is called the woke or black consciousness, the new form of Pan-Africanism, where they are hitting strongly that for Africa to advance, we must do away with everything called religion, particularly the Christian faith. Was Christianity carved by the white man in order to rule or manipulate the black man? Is it true that we have the Bible and in several churches doing the biddings of the white man? Is it even true that Christianity impedes growth or otherwise? Join me this and every Friday from 7 to 8 p.m. on the Voice of Reformation as we look at these subjects. We have able facilitators, the likes of Elder Emmanuel Emisa, Pastor Jacob Honey, Pastor Patrick, Mark Edubuating, and then Kafui Tay. The good thing is also that the last Friday of every month, you get an opportunity to join in by bringing on board your questions so that we ask them for serious interactions. I believe that with all these interactions, the ultimate goal is that Ghana and by extension Africa will be liberated and saved. See ya.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us for yet another exciting and insightful episode of the Voice of Reformation. Last week, we looked at the significance of the resurrection and the sequence of events that unfolded on the resurrection day. This week, we continue with our discussion around the resurrection. We are going to be discussing in detail the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus, and we are looking at biblical and extra biblical evidence that buttress the resurrection. And I have my brother Kafui here who would be helping us in that regard. So Kafui, good evening and welcome.
Yeah, good evening, Richard. It's always a joy to be on this platform and for us to discuss issues concerning our faith. Mm-hmm. And I trust that today would also be an interesting discussion that we'll have, and definitely our listeners and viewers would enjoy the discussions. Yeah.
All right. So thank you very much. So to get straight into the discussion, we have the biblical accounts of the resurrection, but then when we get into the secular world, I believe that there are certain yardsticks and principles that historians use to verify the authenticity of a story.
Yeah.
And even before we start applying some of these principles on the resurrection, can you walk us through some of these principles that are used by historians to verify the authenticity of a historical claim?
Sure. So I think, you've already mentioned it. The resurrection that we are discussing is a historical event. And so in trying to look into the evidence in support of the resurrection of Jesus. Because it's a historical event, it's important to apply the principles that historians usually would use to determine an event that happened in history. And so we'll do that. Just before I go into that, I mean, the food you ate yesterday, it's very difficult for you to prove with 100% certainty. You can tell me that you ate rice and stew. If I wasn't there, it's difficult for you to prove that to me. At best, what I can do is to ask whether there were any eyewitnesses that witnessed you eating rice. That gives us some level of, it gives us some evidence that, okay, you said you ate rice and stew. Someone at least saw you eating the rice and stew. In the absence of the eyewitnesses, perhaps if I come to your kitchen, I can see a bowl of rice or a pot of rice, and I can see that some portion has been taken away. Maybe I can see that your plate has rice, you know. It looks like a plate that has, you know, someone ate rice from. And so that's also another piece of evidence that I can look at. Maybe your wife in a conversation with another friend outside our conversation also mentioned that yesterday we ate rice and stew. And upon hearing that, that also provides some evidence, but there isn't any scientific test that I can do to tell me that, oh, yesterday Richard ate rice and stew. And so I want us to see the event of the resurrection in that light, that it is a historical event, and in analyzing it and in looking at it, we have to look at it like we analyze every historical event. Like we read about Alexander the Great and all of those people who were not there. And those events cannot be repeated. But some way, somehow, we are confident and we have enough support that these events really happened. So it's really an issue of going into the facts and the circumstances surrounding the whole thing and piecing everything together to really prove that indeed an event happened. And that is what a lot of our historians do. So just delving in straight into the question that you asked. So mostly when historians are trying to ascertain a fact, or they are trying to come up with a historical event, they will look at least about five principles. The first one will be the principle of multiple independent sources. So when we have multiple independent sources for an event, you know, describing an event, so we are saying multiple independent sources. Not that Richard witnessed an event and tells me, and then I go and tell somebody, and then the other person tells another person. So here we have about 4 people who are, it's still one source, because Richard was the one that. So when we have multiple independent sources for, you know, an event, it speaks to, it adds some, you know, credibility to the story. So we'll look at how that applies in the case of the resurrection. Then attestation by an enemy, or we say a hostile witness. So if there's a testimony or an attestation, an acceptance of the facts by a hostile witness, somebody we don't expect to, you know, support the event, giving credence to that thing happening, it also adds to the body of, you know, evidence in support of that event. Then we also have what we call embarrassing admissions. So the principle of embarrassment is also something that adds credence to the credibility of an event. So for instance, if I'm writing a story, and the story I'm writing has things that, what do you call it, don't speak well of me or embarrass me as an individual, and yet I admit those things and put it in the story. It also speaks to the credibility of that event. Now we have eyewitness accounts. In any historical event, if you have eyewitnesses, just like any court, case. In fact, we have to take the resurrection discussion like we are dealing with any case in the court where you are looking at evidence in support of it. If there are eyewitnesses, those eyewitnesses play, at least you have people saying that they saw the event happening. You place some credence. It doesn't mean that the thing happened 100%, but it adds on to the evidence. Then lastly, we have what we call the principle of early testimony. So the testimonies that we have, how close are they to the time that the event happened? If it's that close, that also gives some credence to it. So those are the principles that generally historians would, look at, and we can apply it to any historical event, including even the independence of Ghana, including Kwame Nkrumah's life, and all of that. So it's nothing, even including even the World War, and all of those. So we apply the same principles, and looking at the evidence, we should be able to arrive at a conclusion that that event happened.
Okay, great. So is there any evidence that we can easily point out to that stands as an attestation of the resurrection of Jesus Christ? Can you let us know or outline some of this evidence, even before we get to the analysis of the evidence?
Okay. So, talking about evidence and it's something that we usually talk about, the nature of evidence. And I've already stated, there's nothing that can be proven 100%. And so, in any event, what you try to is that you look at the probability that this event is true, and then you look at it. And that is what we are trying to do here. So, I'll mention some facts, and then we'll look at those facts, and then look at the possible explanation for why these events happened, and we'll come to the conclusion that these events are possible because of the resurrection, because it's the resurrection that is able to make these things make sense. And so that's what we will do, and we'll take them one after the other. So we'll just, for the sake of time, just look at about 4, maybe 5 events or facts that are accepted by most scholars. So we are looking at scholars, skeptical scholars, and then of course Christian scholars as well. So generally there are some facts that are granted, that are accepted, is undebated. So let me say, as of now, is generally accepted by everyone. And so those facts are what we are going to use, and then we'll piece them together to come down to the resurrection, the fact that the resurrection, but talking about evidence, the fact that Jesus, the surest evidence to, the resurrection for anything at all is the fact that we are able to see the person who died. A person who died that we all saw buried. If we see that person in front of us, we're able to touch the person, hold the person, and have a conversation with the person. I'm not talking about a vision. People say, okay, I slept, I saw this person. No. But multiple people are able to see this person. Of course, that is the surest evidence. And we believe that evidence exists, but we'll apply the principles to them, and then we'll get to it.
So if you don't mind, just walk us through some of these what you call the facts that scholars and skeptics have come to an agreement on.
Okay.
Bordering on the resurrection of Jesus.
Great. So first of all is the fact that Jesus died by crucifixion. We cannot be talking about resurrection without the person living and dying. The person actually lived and then the person has died. So the first one is the fact that Jesus died and
so
he died
before
by
we
crucifixion.
go on to the second one, any evidence to point to the fact that he died on the crucifixion?
Great. So because we are trying to look, I'll talk about the extra biblical.
Exactly. So
because
outside the Bible, that one is more instrumental now.
Exactly.
So are there any extra biblical references to the points that Jesus was indeed crucified, and then we can come to the remaining of the other three about the resurrection?
So I'll give you about 4 sources. So first will be Josephus.
Okay.
He smiled. Yes, so Josephus, because your nickname is Josephus. All right, so Josephus, who is a first century Jewish historian.
Okay.
He wasn't a Christian. So in his writing, we get a sense of the fact that, and he actually states something. He's talking about, he's just giving the history of the Jews in the early first century AD, and he mentioned something about the death of Christ by crucifixion.
Okay.
I'll quote it. Then we have Tacitus as well. So Tacitus is also a Roman. So I'm giving you a Jewish person. I'm giving you the Roman, historian as well. So we have Tacitus, who also writes, and Tacitus also mentions the fact that Jesus was crucified, and he actually tells us he was crucified during the reign of Tiberius by the governor Pontius Pilate. So he mentions that clearly also in his writings. And we have some writing of Lucian, we have Maraba, Serapion, and the likes. And so all of these people who are non-Christians or are hostile, witnesses, mention the fact that Jesus was crucified and he died.
Okay.
So this is what Josephus wrote, in his book. So that there arose about this time Jesus, a wise man. And it continues. And when Pilate condemned him to the cross on his impeachment by the chief men among us, those who had loved him first did not cease. So Josephus emphatically makes a point that he was condemned by Pontius Pilate and he was crucified on the cross. So that is clear. And Josephus is writing somewhere in the first century. And he is recounting the revolt in AD 70 about the destruction of the second temple and all of that, and he's giving us the history. So although he's writing sometime that, far from the time that Jesus died, and he himself wasn't an eyewitness, he's recording the history based on the research that he had done at the time, and it was general knowledge amongst the people that were living at that time that there was a certain Jesus who died.
Okay.
And he records it, although Jesus was not the focus of his writing. But because it is indeed an event that happened, his focus is not to write about Jesus.
He mentions it in passing.
Exactly.
Okay.
Then when you look at Tacitus as well, Tacitus also writes in AD 115. And he writes something. It says that their originator, is writing about the Christians, says that their originator Christ had been executed in Tiberius's reign by Pontius Pilate. So he also speaks to the fact that Jesus was crucified under the reign of Pontius Pilate, under the reign of Tiberius by the governor Pontius Pilate. Then we have Lucian and then Mara and all of that. But because of time, I don't want to really go into it. Actually, there's evidence in the Jewish Talmud. So the Talmud is the writings of the Jewish teachers, the rabbis, commentary and all of that. They also make reference. So these are all hostile, witnesses making an admission of the fact that he died. So that's the first thing, the first fact that we want to talk about, that he indeed died, contrary to the stories, especially in Islam, where they think that Jesus didn't die and that, he escaped and all of that. And contrary also to the Sun theory. I think we'll have an episode where we discuss that, so I'll just leave it to that.
So let's circle back. Let's get back to the other three.
Facts. Okay.
So we've talked about the fact that he was indeed crucified and died. So any other, and you mentioned that there were four, so just outline the other three that.
So the second is the fact that Jesus' disciples, they actually believed that Jesus had risen because they believed that they had seen the risen Christ. And if you give me some time, I will speak to it, because it doesn't look on the face of it, okay, the disciples believed it. It's up to them to believe that Jesus, rose from the dead. It's up to them, because they had been, you would say that, somebody would say that, oh, these are people that worked with him and these are his supporters. So obviously they can always come up with the theories that he resurrected. But the truth is that the fact of the disciples believing that they had seen the risen Christ is so enormous that you can't just, write it off. And the first thing is that these are people who were scared when Jesus was arrested and they got scattered. What is it that moved these people to come out boldly to preach that Jesus Christ had resurrected? Mind you, when we looked at the first episode, these were people who were not even expecting. They had even forgotten that the man told them about, his resurrection. And if you look at Jesus' conversation with the disciples on the road to Emmaus, and they said, are you the only strange person in Jerusalem? Have you not heard about the fact that, and all of those things? So there were people who were not and they couldn't even recognize him initially, because really in your mind you are not expecting this person to be up. For these people now to come out boldly and to declare that and preach it at the expense of their own lives tells you that, even not for anything, we are not saying that just because they believe it means that it happened, but it tells you that they have a strong basis for coming out now to tell you that we have seen the risen Jesus, in that they were able to now put down their life, and to be martyred, killed, crucified in several forms. And they are, historical, or let me say, they are extra biblical writings that speak to how some of these, disciples lost their life. But the point is that, okay, maybe go ahead. You don't know how to
No, so I'm thinking, we are talking about the fact that these people were dying of cowardice, hiding, and then all of a sudden they had the confidence to come out and proclaim. But anything could have also happened in their cowardice and in their hiding together. They could have been hypnotized. They could have been subjected to any form of psychological instruments or any psychologically stimulating substance for them to all of a sudden come out with that kind of boldness to say that no, the man is arisen, and they are all going about saying the same thing. Could it be as a result of some psychological stimulus on them that is making them this bold and declaring and willing to die for probably a truth that really isn't that true after all?
Great. So I wish, and I think our skeptical friends wish that this was the fact, but in reality, psychological events, or psychological, as you put it, whatever it is that brought them up, psychological events and issues don't just happen to a mass, you know. If it's an individual, we can talk about it. And there's been a lot of writings, psychological investigations done into this. And the evidence as it stands now doesn't support that theory that a group of people who are mourning all of a sudden, and we are talking about the fact that at least there were over 500 witnesses who believed so strongly that they had seen this Jesus. So you are saying that all the 500 seen at different points, including even Paul, who was not part of the disciples. All of a sudden, Paul also had a psychological issue, and then he also came out now, convert and become bold to. It doesn't match. There has to be something else that really brings us to that unity that we could see. And so I think I was coming to that point that there's no, and we've spoken to psychologists and all of that. There are actually writings and investigations done, and like I said, when we tackle the theories, we would see that theory doesn't hold. Another thing is that, still on the issue about the fact that the disciples believed it, that they had seen the risen Christ. Somebody will also say, oh, we've had matters of other religious beliefs. Okay, we have people, a jihadist, for instance, and a Muslim who can, you know, they can die because it's holy war in belief or, you know, in support of their belief. What about that? The difference here is that in the case of the disciples, they were not telling you that somebody wrote somewhere or somebody taught them that Jesus had risen, and they believed what somebody had told them. They were dying for things that they themselves claim that they have seen. It's different from the stories that we hear about other people, in that I could say somebody has spoon-fed you, so you can die for a lie because that lie has been told to you by somebody else. But you won't die by telling yourself a lie and believing a lie that is concocted or that came up, or you yourself cooked and then you die for it. It doesn't make any sense. So that is the difference that we are looking at here. The fact that they were now ready. These are the people who were all of a sudden running away, now ready to come out and to die. Because they believed strongly what they had seen. That thing that they had seen had emboldened them. I told you that the resurrection of Jesus is the very proof that all the things that he claimed to be is true. So after they saw that risen Christ, they were bold now, because they now could see that, I mean, all the things that the man had told us, really, this is somebody, this is God, this is not an ordinary person, and we can go ahead and no matter, I mean, damn it, whatever that happens to us, we are ready to die for this truth. So the fact that the disciples believed it and were willing, not only believe it. So we have to now, the question is, what is it that made the disciples believe it and want to die at the point? And that answer for me is the fact that they had seen the risen and the resurrected Christ.
Great. So we have talked about the extra biblical proof, both Jewish and non-Jewish historians. You have talked about the belief, the unflinching belief of the disciples that attested to the resurrection, and you mentioned 4. So can we also talk about the other 2 now?
Yeah, so we'll look at Paul's conversion
as
well. And I'm mentioning Paul, and I'm saying that at least these are all facts that are attested to or are accepted by scholars.
Can we take a break? Your bad was subject to answer from a question. Yeah, can they?
Yeah, on. Yeah, so the third fact that we want to look at is Paul's conversion. And I was saying that these are all facts that are granted by skeptics, historical scholars, be it Christians and then non-Christian scholars. And I'm saying that Paul's writings, the fact that Paul was not initially a Christian and became a Christian, is accepted. So Paul's conversion is also a very important thing that has to be looked at. So there was a Paul who initially was hostile to Christians. In fact, you read Galatians, Galatians chapter 2 verse 22 to 23, Paul in his writing even states it. And the book of Galatians, 1 Corinthians are all part of the books that at least there's some credibility within the scholarly world. And these books were written by Paul. He states that it was part of the oral tradition. The news went around that this Paul, who was persecuting us, is now preaching our message. So Paul's conversion is something that, really something dramatic should have happened before Paul, who was actually the one persecuting the people, now got converted. And we are saying that it is the resurrection of Jesus that actually caused Paul to convert. I'd have loved to go into it, but for the sake of time, I'll just move on. And then also even adding to the second fact that I raised, that the disciples believed that he had written. In 1 Corinthians 15, there's a creed that is mentioned there. And in that creed is the fact that early on, and this creed, even one of the skeptics, contemporary skeptics, who is a New Testament scholar called Bart Ehrman, he actually even traces that creed to like 1 year after the crucifixion. That 1 year after the crucifixion, within 1 year, and some people actually say between 1 to 5 years of the death and resurrection of Jesus, the believers actually put it in their creed. It was part of the things that they used to recite, that they believed that Jesus Christ died and then he resurrected. The fourth point that I'll speak to because of time is the fact that there was an empty tomb. That's in fact, actually, let me not jump, because the empty tomb theory, there's still some debate around it. But the fourth point that I would speak to is the fact that James, the brother of Jesus, who was also skeptical about Jesus and his claims, also became converted.
But why would we think that James's conversion, if he's the brother of Jesus, why would we think that his conversion is substantial evidence of the resurrection? He's his brother, and he would run with any story for the whole world to believe his brother was indeed.
Yes. That's but the fact that don't support that James, whilst Jesus was alive, he didn't believe in Jesus. When you read the gospel accounts, you will know that his family didn't accept the fact that he was what he claimed to be. There were times that they even rebuked him in public, because, and we are talking about the brother of, because he knew Jesus up close. And we know our father, we know our mother, and all of that. So James was a skeptic, which is clear.
Okay.
And for him now to convert, to become a Christian, and be willing to die for what he believed in after the death of his brother, is something that is very substantial. Because the assumption is that if James was Jesus' brother, he believed that, or everything that had been said about him. But in this instance, this is a brother who didn't believe that his brother or his half brother Jesus was what he claimed to be. And that is a fact that is established. That he didn't initially believe that Jesus was what he claimed. And he wasn't a supporter of Jesus. And so something might have happened. And when Paul is mentioning the people that Jesus appeared to in 1 Corinthians 15, he mentions James as one of the people that Jesus appeared to after his resurrection. So that fact is also well established. So putting it all together, we are saying that something dramatic happened. Something dramatic happened. And that thing that happened that made all of these people, and we are not talking about one person, two people, three people, we are talking at least about 500 people, all attesting to the fact that they saw the risen Jesus and had become emboldened to now preach. And their preaching was very simple. That Jesus, we look at the book of Acts and what Peter preached after the day of Pentecost. He preached boldly about the death of Jesus Christ, and then he went into the Old Testament prophecies that spoke to the resurrection of Jesus, that the Messiah, the son of David, there was need for him to die, and that he wasn't going to be left in the grave, but he was going to resurrect. And that is the Jesus that they crucified. And based on that, he preached to the people. Paul went to the city of Athens, and he saw that the people had written to the unknown God. And he spoke with the scholars and the Stoics, the Epicureans, the philosophers of the day. And Paul mentioned that this God, he has set a day that he's going to judge people, and that he has given proof to men by raising Jesus from the dead. That formed the core basis of the preaching of the early church. That proof that Jesus resurrected. And so that is the only thing that accounts for these facts that I have mentioned, that indeed Jesus died and he was raised from the dead. Based on this, we are able to now explain these facts, that Paul, a hostile, a persecutor, having seen the risen Jesus, was converted and was willing to die for what he had seen. The fact that the disciples believed it and they were willing to die for it, and not lying to themselves, it meant that they had seen something supernatural. So theories have come up, the swoon theory, the hallucination theory, which I said we will tackle. And you will notice that when we look at it, none of them explains the facts other than the resurrection of Jesus. So we have the empty tomb as well, which I'm saying that some scholars, including skeptics, grant it, but it's not universally accepted. But the fact that there was an empty tomb is something that is very important, because we have already explained that Jesus was crucified. They have established it, attested to by both, Christians, non-Christians, Jewish, Roman historians. He was buried. And so going into the tomb to produce a body would have been the simplest thing to do to disprove the fact that Jesus, didn't resurrect. The fact that in Jewish writings, and you look at the writings, you would notice that they came up with explanations and theories about the fact that the body wasn't there. They didn't deny the fact that the tomb didn't have the body. They didn't deny it. Rather, they came up with reasons admitting that indeed the tomb was empty. But the explanation of the tomb being empty, like I said, if you go into it, you will notice that it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense in the sense that there were guards who were guarding it. So those guards who claim to have seen the disciples stealing the body, what did they do about it? Yes, you notice that they were stealing the body. And what did you do about it? You just sat there, watched them to steal the body. Then afterwards, you go and report to the, the authorities that the body had been stolen. It doesn't make sense. So the tomb was empty, and we need to explain why the tomb was empty. Like I said, there are several theories about why the tomb was empty. The question is, just like any court case, we'll look at the evidence and see which one is closer to the truth. And when you examine all those other theories, you notice that they don't add up. Other than the only thing that explains that tomb being empty is the resurrection of Jesus. I don't want to go into the details of that because of our time, but maybe at another time we can look at why we are saying that. So the fact that the tomb was empty is something that has to be looked into and has to be addressed. Now, rounding it all up, I mentioned 5, criteria, principles that historians use, and I think that the story of the resurrection satisfy all of that. There are multiple independent sources that adds to the credibility of a historical event. We mentioned that when there is the principle of embarrassment, where the people who are writing the stories admit certain embarrassing situations, like Peter denying Jesus, the fact that it was even women that Jesus appeared to first, and the fact that it was the women that discovered that the tomb was empty, because at that time the testimony of women were not considered or were not even taken seriously. So if they were trying to concoct or come up with a story, they will not use the testimony of women, knowing what. In fact, when the women went to tell them, the disciples' first reaction, they didn't believe it. It tells you that. So that the fact about the embarrassment, the principle of admission of embarrassment, is a fact that speaks to it. So that is also satisfied. Then we talk about the closeness of the historical account to the event, and the best that you can get, that you will look at, where we have writings of a historical figure, the best that we can get will be Alexander the Great. And Alexander the Great's first writing, the biography about him that was written was 400 years after Alexander the Great. Yet we all believe it, because of course the tradition, the oral tradition, everything had gone. So it's not like the story wasn't known, but the first writing that we know of is about 400 years after the event happened. In the case of Jesus, because the Gospels were written, let's say the first one might have been written plus 25 years. Let's say, let's take the Gospel of Mark, for instance. The Gospel of Mark written somewhere between AD 70 thereabout. Matthew,
the first century.
Yes, Matthew somewhere around 85 thereabout. Look at that of Luke and John. They all happen
within the first century.
Yes, and it is quite close to the event. So if we accept event or stories of someone that died 400 years before the first writing, why can't we accept one that is that close? So that criteria is also satisfied. I'm trying to remember the other things that I mentioned. So the eyewitness accounts, we have multiple eyewitness accounts claiming that they saw Jesus. And the eyewitness account is supported by their dying for that thing that they believed. Hardly will you get any witness dying for something they think they had seen. But these people were willing to die for it. And that speaks to it. So that multiple, what do you call it, eyewitness account is also, satisfied. I think I've touched on all the the attestation by the enemy and hostile witnesses. I was speaking about embarrassing admissions, eyewitness accounts, and then early testimony. So when you piece all of it together, it's quite clear that indeed Jesus died and he resurrected. And if Jesus indeed died and resurrected, it has consequences. The consequences include the fact that all his teachings and his claims about himself, his dying and his resurrection, the purchasing and redemption that he got for us, really is true. And therefore, if you fall on the wrong side of that, there are consequences to that.
Great. So, thank you very much. And I think this evening's session have been very insightful. My brother Kafu has made us understand the reasons, and of course the evidence you pointed out this evening are so glaring that they cannot be overlooked. I mean, the fact that there is extra biblical attestation to the resurrection, the conversion of adversaries to even the life or the personality of Christ. We're also looking at the unflinching belief and the trust that disciples had in the whole process of the resurrection, and all the evidence that you've pointed out to us this evening. We are very grateful, and I believe that you also watching has come to understand the basis of the resurrection, which actually forms the foundation of Christianity. We are hoping to see you next week, and we promise that we have a more exciting and a more insightful session. Stay blessed and see you next week.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Shadow beneath thy hand, may we forever stand true to our God, true to our native land.
Hi, I'm Joshua Ponsafo of the New African Concept. I believe strongly that you've been blessed so far with the various episodes of the Voice of Reformation. And I'm very much excited to inform you that with the next 3 months ahead, February, March, and then April, there is a special package in the area of apologetics. I know you have several questions on your mind, and so do I. For the month of February, we'll be considering the subject area of the Bible. So questions like, is the Bible truly the Word of God, or it is just a figment of human beings? And that, how did we even arrive at getting our Bible today? Are there various versions of the Bible, and how did we even get that? And are they the same? Are they similar, or they are different? In the month of March, we'll also be looking at the subject of black skepticism. I believe you've heard and seen that there is a new wave that is called the woke, or black consciousness, the new form of Pan-Africanism, where they are hitting strongly that for Africa to advance, we must do away with everything called religion, particularly the Christian faith. Was Christianity carved by the white man in order to rule or manipulate the black man? Is it true that we have the Bible and in several churches doing the biddings of the white man? Is it even true that Christianity impedes growth, or otherwise? Join me this and every Friday from 7 to 8 p.m. on the Voice of Reformation as we look at these subjects. We have able facilitators, the likes of Elder Emmanuel Emisa, Pastor Jacob Honey, Pastor Patrick, Mark Edu-Boateng, and then Kafu Ite. The good thing is also that the last Friday of every month, you get an opportunity to join in by bringing on board your questions so that we ask them for serious interactions. I believe that with all these interactions, the ultimate goal is that Ghana, and by extension Africa, will be liberated and saved. See ya.
Lift every voice.